see. When they're all rolling in, it's always awesome to see all the little names start popping through. I'll say my hellos when we get to a nice little number here. All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Ion ESI. My name is Maribel Rivera. I am the Vice President of Strategy and Client Engagement here at ACEDS. And basically, it just means that I help run the community and get to engage with all of you. I am joined today by my colleague, Mike Quartararo, President of ACEDS, and of course, Jared Coseglia, CEO and founder of True Staffing. You can connect with Jared. He's dropped his email address in the chat for everyone. If you have not been here before, this is an open forum. We want to engage with you. We want to hear your questions. We want to hear your comments. This is not just the three of us being talking heads. If you've been with us before, you already know how this basically goes. But again, this is going to be engaging. Jared's going to give us a ton of content, right, Jared? And yes, you're going to download it all so that, whatever you need to ingest or come back to us with questions. Jared's team is also in the chat. So if you've got questions, please feel free to throw them there as well for them. Jared, how are you doing?
Happy May. May flowers from all the April showers. We're here.
Yes. I don't even know what the weather is like anymore because it seems like it's a different thing every day. So tell us what we're looking at this month.
So we'll tell you what we're looking at, but I would say if you haven't downloaded our 2024 eDiscovery Jobs Report, this gives you a really in-depth overview of what's happened in eDiscovery since the end of the pandemic and how we've recalibrated as an industry and community in the job market since. You can QR code this now and download it. And, it was like writing my thesis statement in eDiscovery job search. So I am always excited to talk to people who've actually read it and have opinions or questions about it. So some of the data you'll see in today's presentation comes from that, but we're now out of the first quarter and we're a third of the way through the second quarter of 2024. Can you believe it? And
I cannot.
Some trends that we're seeing happening based on the market sort of figuring out what the year will look and feel like. The first of which being that cautiously optimistic investment hiring is driving more direct hire placement in eDiscovery. And for those of you who know me and the True Staffing Partners brand, you know that we do eDiscovery, we do data privacy, we do cybersecurity, we do information governance, we do legal ops, we do a number of other things. And eDiscovery really stands apart from other industries right now with the amount of full-time hiring that's out there relative to contracting, meaning that there's more of it, right?
And you're gonna give us why, right?
100%.
Okay.
100%. So the other thing that we'll unpack a little bit today is this: if you're looking for jobs or you're looking for talent in the 80 to 100K range, we're starting to call that the sweet spot or the dead zone. And we'll unpack exactly what that means. But there is demand and lack of supply in that segment, and people don't stay in that salary range for very long in eDiscovery, and we can unpack what that means later. Motivations have really started to change over the last 60 days, and what we can categorically say now is that when people come to us seeking employment, the things that are driving them are burnout, I'm feeling understaffed, I'm feeling overworked, or I'm feeling underpaid or undervalued. And that may not just be financial undervaluing. It could be more of an emotional or professionally feeling undervalued in their position. But there is dissatisfaction driving job seekers to the marketplace as opposed to opportunism, which is a bit of a shift in the mindset of the eDiscovery job seeker. We've got a slow move towards a candidate job market, guys, and we'll unpack what that means. But I can tell you that for the last 18 months, it's been very much an employer's marketplace. And we saw that happen in a very dramatic way in Q4 of 2022. Zuckerberg laid off 10,000 people. The NASDAQ crashed. We saw everybody preparing for what we thought would be a recession. That didn't happen. And because that was such a dramatic moment at a macroeconomic level, we saw a dramatic shift in hiring and the modality of which people were hiring, largely which was contract last year. And now we're starting to see things move back to candidates getting multiple offers at the time of departure, to candidates negotiating a bit more, to candidates asking for more money and not just taking the first offer that they get, which is not what we saw at this time last year. Quite the opposite, honestly. So it's beginning now to become more of a candidates market. It's not a candidates market yet, but by the end of this year, we think it will be.
So Jared, I want to unpack that a little bit because, we talk about a candidates market or the employer market. We do something very similar in real estate, right? We sell sellers market, buyers
Correct.
market. What exactly does that mean? More of a candidate favorable job market?
What it means are a couple of things. What it means is A, people are going to be able to negotiate higher increases in salary at the point of hire because there are more jobs available and competition for their talent is increasing while supply for their talent diminishes. When demand increases for a certain bracket of the market and that supply diminishes, the people searching in that bracket tend to be able to get higher increases in salary, requiring employers to pay a little bit more because they've got options. And they may use those options to get the best offer at the company they really want to work for. We didn't see that in the first 3 quarters of last year. We went 180 days last year, which was the longest period of time we've ever gone in our business without a single candidate who received an offer through us getting a counteroffer from their current employer. It was unheard of. At least somebody gets a counteroffer along the way. Nobody was counteroffering for nearly half the year at a certain 6-month stretch last year. That's starting to change. We're seeing candidates get counters. We're seeing people have 1, 2, sometimes 3 offers before they decide which one to accept. And for the most part, they're still accepting the first offer they receive, which shows you the importance of being efficient and deliberate with your hiring process. Speed is part of it, but deliberateness is part of it too, because candidates who have multiple offers want to feel like that employer really wants them. And speed is one way to show how much you desire a candidate, but some of the more ethereal tone, deliberateness, the communication that occurs during the interview process, the communication that happens during follow-ups, all of that deliberateness, in addition to speed showing deliberateness, empowers the candidate to feel like, I want to go to somebody who really wants me, as opposed to somebody who is taking their time and window shopping, and maybe at the end of the day, I'm right, but the chemistry wasn't as extreme as what some other potential employers are showing the job seeker.
Got it. Very helpful. Thank you.
Cool. Sales, project management, and ESI attorney roles lead demand. What's amazing about this is ESI attorney roles weren't on this list maybe ever. We're seeing a really, and I don't mean doc review, I mean practicing attorneys who are doing things like negotiating TAR protocol, negotiating e-discovery, search terms, sitting in on meet and confers. The proportionality of jobs for roles like that compared to the more operational e-discovery that we traditionally see is starting to change. We're seeing more demand for e-discovery attorneys. Generally speaking, in corporate, they're kind of expected to do everything. And in law firms, they can be a little more specialized. Like you might be a analytics e-discovery attorney guru, or you might be a litigator e-discovery guru, or you might not have to have all pieces of the puzzle. But what we find in corporate is they generally want you to have a little bit of everything.
I wonder, Jared, if that's just sort of an indication of the maturation of the e-discovery market, right? For many, many years, like e-discovery wasn't a lawyer thing. It was run largely by, guys like myself, my law firm career, I always found myself running into obstacles where I couldn't make a decision because it required a legal interpretation or a lawyer's decision making, or a lawyer at the client making a decision. And I couldn't make those decisions because I wasn't a practicing lawyer. But I'm wondering now if people are coming around to the idea that it's good to have a practicing lawyer in a leadership role making these legal decisions.
No, I don't think that's what it is, mainly because the roles we're filling aren't necessarily subplants in leadership where they're also having oversight of the operational execution of these tasks. Quite the opposite. They are sitting squarely in legal corporate OGC's offices, or in a practice group, either litigation or e-discovery or analytics, or sometimes privacy protection, doing that work at a law firm at outside counsel. What I think is maybe more impacting it, Mike, is the macro trends that we're in that are twofold. One, we're moving into a more litigious era right now, right? If we remember just how many, like I always follow Kelly Twigger's how many cases, right?
Yeah.
And we saw a big dip in cases in 2023, a big dip, right? Which made sense because we saw a big dip in the job market, a big dip in demand. People didn't want to spend money on suing each other because everybody thought we were going into a recession. So you saw corporate litigation start to recede a little bit, thus impacting e-discovery. Well, here we are going into an election year, and we know who the two people are who are running for president, and we know what their reputations are in terms of litigation, and we're moving into a culture where we're being more aggressive litigants. That is driving downstream job opportunity and market growth for e-discovery, whether we like it or not. But what we're also seeing is a resistance because of the economic downturn for people to invest in high-end operational talent. But when it comes to the lawyering, when it comes to compliance, when it comes to betting the farm, when it comes to getting an expert who is going to give you legal advice, corporations are more willing to spend money there and invest there in a down economy relative to operational talent. And look, we're seeing the same thing in data privacy and cybersecurity. Attorney staffing, right, meaning bar JDs in data privacy was 35% of the job market last year. That was really high percentage. And we're actually anticipating that's going to go up next year if we have federal legislation passed for privacy, this American Privacy Act that's being proposed, because companies will have to rally to hire lawyers to stay compliant with a new regulation, but it won't necessarily force them to operationalize privacy. And sometimes this is the same metaphor for e-discovery. We have to address the subpoena. We have to have an expert tell us what it's going to cost or what the risks may be. We want a lawyer to come in and do some AI or TAR work to tell us what we've got and advise us. But we don't know if we're ready to operationalize or outsource to a vendor who then has to hire and operationalize the infrastructure necessary to support an active, ongoing e-discovery litigation with clear deadlines. Maybe that's helpful context.
So I just want to make sure we're almost halfway through. So I want to make sure we keep on because I think there's some other tidbits we want to dig into.
Definitely, and I'll move briskly. This last one is a good transition into some of our data, but essentially fully remote jobs get filled 5 times faster than hybrid ones and 9 times faster than in-office ones. So, this is guidance for people who are trying to get people into an office. If you're 4 days or more, it's going to take you almost 10 times as long as it would if they were fully remote. And in the middle is what it means to be 2 to 3 days a week in terms of speed.
And that seems to be a battle that a lot of companies are just facing across the board, not just in e-discovery, but everywhere.
That's absolutely correct.
Hey, Jared, just a reminder to everybody, is there a premium paid for people who go into offices?
Well, they want a premium. I don't know if it's always paid. Often they're not willing to pay it, and so they start their search over. But job seekers want to be paid on average about a 25 to 30% increase in base comp to leave a fully remote position and consider a hybrid or fully in-office one. We've got some candidates, for example, if they're making 100K and they're being recruited for a job that's in an office 4 or 5 days a week, they're asking for $140,000 to $150,000 to make that move. Yeah.
Right.
As you can see, Q1 motivations for ESI job seekers. So when we talked to probably over 1,000 job seekers in the first quarter, maybe 2. And I would say that more than half of them are motivated by number 1 in the first quarter. I would say a large percentage of the other half are motivated by number 2, which was burnout. 3 is always money. Money's kind of always on there. People are looking to diversify. Maybe I'd call that boredom a little bit, or glass ceiling. Where do I go? And then a lot of people at the entry level or semi-entry level of the market want that Rel 1 experience because they know that that's going to give them leverage professionally and open them up to more opportunities. Now, look at what changes in just the month of April. All right. Money drops to number 4. Vertical growth potential, still something people are looking for. A lot of people hitting the concrete ceiling at project management. Burnout is now number 1. People are understaffed, they're burnt out, they're working too many hours, they're complaining about it, their quality of life is not what they want it to be, they're being asked to come into an office and they don't want to. All these reasons, it's burning them out. Yes,
That's-
people still want to work remotely more, but number one is really what's driving most of the market.
Which is some of what we saw during the pandemic as well. People were burning out, and that's why we started having these discussions around burnout. It kind of got back to some type of norm. And now I've heard more and more people talking about burnout over the
Yeah.
last few months.
I don't know if it got back to a norm. We just accepted whatever the chaos was going to be for 21 and 22, right? We accepted that chaos. And part of that chaos was 2/3 of my staff is gone. I have to replace people. It doesn't matter what they cost. We cannot execute our business without replacing all the people who've made an exodus. Well, in 2023, there weren't any exodus. There were trickles of people moving jobs, and that created some musical chair chain reaction of opportunity, but there was very little net new add to staff hiring. So when we take in new job orders, we always ask customers, is this an add to staff or is this a replacement for somebody who's left? And in 2023, like 90% were replacements for people who'd left. It was astronomically high. So people are only hiring when they needed to replace them.
So as a job seeker, right? And you're looking to move from one role to another. I mean, you can't actually ask the straight out question around burnout, but how do you address a question like that?
Well, I think the question I just asked is a good place to start. Is this an add to staff or the replacement of somebody departing the organization? Because if it's an add to staff, what it usually signals is growth. If it's replacement, what it signals are, okay, why now you get to unpack, tell me why the person left, where were there, potential inadequacies that I would need to rise to the occasion to, or what was the firm not able to deliver or the company not able to deliver to retain the employee? Now you're getting, the hiring manager to really talk about the challenges and rewards that are available or to be aware of coming into an opportunity with a level of transparency that's not hypothetical anymore, right?
Right.
I like that question. I think it's a fair question. And if it makes, your interviewer uncomfortable, you probably don't want to work for them, right?
Right.
So that's one way to do that.
But I worry a little bit that an employee or a candidate, sorry, interviewing for a job, would they have, I don't know what the word is, do they have the nerve to ask those questions, right? That's
why if you're working with someone like Jared and his team, they're going to prep you for those questions, right? And to ask the right questions, and they may have some insight.
Yeah, and empower you. I mean, look, I'm flying to Vegas next week to speak at Clock about interviewing in legal operations. And, people ask me, why are you doing that? Well, I want to empower people to do better, on these interviews and ask these hard questions, right? Because the worst thing that can happen in an interview process is a misfire, right? That's the worst thing that can happen for everybody involved. We've spent all this time interviewing, we've hired somebody, they've left the job, we're spending all this time training them, we've made the wrong hire. And I think if you have the courage and confidence to ask appropriate, but challenging, sometimes uncomfortable even questions on an interview, you're going to find that you peel the layers of the onion back on what you want and what they want faster so that you can really determine if this is a good long-term fit.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Let's keep moving.
Let's go.
This, as we said at the beginning, is what's really driving the market. We're feeling undervalued, underpaid, overworked, and that's going to continue to drive the market, I think, at least for the rest of this quarter. Offer acceptance likelihood. So we track if a candidate receives multiple offers, which offer do they take? Is it the first offer they receive, the second offer they receive, the third offer they receive, or beyond? And if you look down at 2022 at the bottom, you can see that if you were the first offer extended to a candidate, you had less than a 50-50 chance that they were going to say yes. And then less than 6 months later, you could see you had an 80% chance they were going to say yes. Well, why? In 2022, there were so many jobs, so many opportunities. 2023, there weren't. Well, look what's slowly starting to happen as we move through 2024. The needle is moving back to what we would call a candidate's job market. So when we talked earlier today about it being a candidate's job market, this is something we look at as a key indicator that it's moving in that direction. It means candidates are getting more offers. It means they're taking more than the bird in the hand. They're looking at the two in the bush. It means that people are going to potentially have to consider paying a little bit more money in order to get them to take their offer over someone else's. I can tell you we've done a lot of negotiating over the month of April. We did not do nearly as much negotiating in the first quarter of this year because there was nothing to negotiate, right? People had the job, they wanted the job. This is what they want. They gave it to them and they took it. Now we're seeing candidates say, well, yes, I said I wanted that, but I've got another offer at this, which is $20,000 more. And so if they want me, I need them to come up, or I'd like them to come up. Sometimes they come up all the way. Sometimes they come up halfway. Sometimes they don't come up at all. More often than not, they come up a little bit, right? If they really want them. And we're seeing that that's starting to now give candidates a little bit more leverage on the job interview process. But I'll also say this. There's still not as many jobs out there right now as there were in 2021 and 2022. So be careful, because we had some people negotiate too hard, or in our opinion, unrealistically, or ask for something we didn't think that they would get, and it soured the employer, and they passed on them, rescinded the offer, and hired the second choice, because there are a lot of really quality candidates looking, particularly in the 175 to 300 range, which is not where most of the jobs are.
And I like to remind folks too, Jared, that it's not always about money either. Like, don't hang your career on, 5 or 10 grand. It's just not, you're gonna get a raise, you're gonna get a bonus, you're gonna grow in your role if you start someplace. If you're any good at what you do, there's going to be opportunity for you down the road. So don't, and this is for our listeners, really, just don't hang your hat on you didn't get the right counter offer or whatever the dollar amount is you're looking for. That's not. Find a job where you can manage your life, pay your bills, and have a life, right?
Agreed. Cool. Let's take a look at contract versus direct hire. This is the most dramatic change. You could see from Q1, it was like 50-50. The amount of jobs being filled that were contractors, the amount of jobs being filled that were FTE, skyrocketed to nearly 80% in the month of April. A lot of that was because there was a lot of direct hiring in February, not a lot in March, and a lot of those placements were transacted and people pulled the trigger in April. But I think what this signals to us is a really healthy job market. And again, that first bullet point, which I mentioned before, which is people cautiously, optimistically investing in full-time hires, because when an employer hires somebody in a full-time capacity, they're looking at hopefully a perpetual, but at a minimum, a 3 to 5 year window of employment, determining success. And then that's what I tell people. If you hire somebody from me and they stay with you from 3 to 5 years, that's a home run in ediscovery, right? The average tenure for somebody is less than 3 years. So if they're staying 3 to 5, home run. If they stay 5 to 10, even better. But that's what's driving this, as opposed to, I've got a project, I've got a client, somebody left, I need a contractor, I got to plug a hole. There's a little more, let's be thoughtful. Let's bring in somebody that has some contract analytics expertise, or I want to bring in a relativity 1 person, or we need more people to process data in Rel 1 now that we have licensing in-house, and we're going to start taking some of that work in-house as opposed to outsourcing it. This is driving a lot of the FTE hiring.
How much of this, Jared, is conversions from contract to full FTE?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's interesting because in ediscovery, it's still pretty low. It's in the high teens, low 20s. So it's somewhere in that 16 to 21% of those contractors get offered conversions. I can tell you that only about 60% of them take it, though. A lot of them lifestyle contractors, they don't want to convert, and they wind up just staying on perpetually or being phased out and then moving on to something else. But here's what's really interesting. In data privacy, it's 42% this year.
Wow.
42% of our contractors in data privacy have been asked to convert into full-time employees. And when you look at the metrics there, they're the opposite. They're like 65% contract and 35% FTE jobs. And that's because most of those jobs are in corporations where they're a cost center, they're non-billable, they're not revenue generating. Whereas in ediscovery, most of the jobs are at law firms and vendors where they're billing, they're generating revenue, they're profitable, and it's easier to estimate the ROI on an employee in ediscovery than it is an employee in a corporate privacy program. And so they're leaning into contractors much more. But that's not a bad thing, because they're able to convert them at such a high rate, at almost 50% rate, which we've never seen before, unheard of, right? The average conversion rate annually is somewhere between 8 and 12%. So it's unusually high in ediscovery right now, but it's also extremely unusually high in data privacy in the corporate sector, because that's where most of the jobs are. The money chart, salaries haven't changed, but we want to draw attention to this thin blue line here. The thin blue line, and I don't mean the police reference of that term. I mean our reference. The thin blue line is this range, because you'll see between technician and analyst, there's this gap of like 20K. And you're saying, well, Jared, what about people in that gap? Here's the problem with people in that gap. There's very few of them, very, very few. Because once somebody gets into the business in that 50 to 75 range, they're generally getting a raise that puts them in 80 to 100 pretty quickly, right? And then once they're in that 80 to 100 range, they're either getting promoted or they're getting another job that gets them into that 100 to 120 range within 3 years. That's sort of the beauty of ediscovery. If you can find a way in, there's a bell curve on earning potential between years 2 and 4. And what we're seeing is this is where people sit in that dead zone before they hit that bell curve. Finite amount of people, because few people get into the business. And when they do, they don't sit in this pocket for very long before they get elevated into the next one. There's also a truncated timeline to promotion, or they're going to leave, right? If you've got someone in that 80 to 100 range and you're a hiring manager, just know that every one of your competitors in every law firm in America is looking for that person with 2 years experience that's at 80 to 100K. And then the second thing is that may lead to it causing you longer to hire people because there's less of them. They're in high demand. They go on and off the market very quickly, usually a 30-day timeline to hire for someone at this level. And then people are having to start their process over because there's not, a dozen of them available for every open job. So I wanted to draw attention to this because if you're in that zone and you're not happy, give us a call because there are a lot of people looking for you. And those are the people getting those 25, 30% increases. Those people at the high end of the market that are at 150, 200, they're not getting jobs that give them 25, 30% increases. Those increases are incremental, 5, 10%, because the demand for those people is just not as high as the demand for these right now.
So Jared, I want to ask a question because I think this has been coming up more and more, and we talked a little bit about this during our prep, but that finite talent pool, how do we, what do we need to do to address that talent pool?
We need industrial farming systems, which we do not have as a community and haven't had for nearly the 25 years that I've been in the space. We need people willing to hire and train, and there are not many.
Yeah.
There are just very
It's
few.
interesting. I'm reminded of the way that the big firms, and I think to some extent they still do this today, but they go out and they recruit on undergrad campuses and they bring in folks who don't necessarily, they may have an interest in the law or they don't really have any skill set. And I'm talking about paralegals in particular, right? They hire them legal assistants, junior paralegals, whatever the case may be. And the big firms do that on a pretty broad scale still. But I don't know anyone that's really doing that for e-discovery or even privacy or cyber, honestly.
It seems to be a challenge, right? That's the challenge is, I mean, for me, a lot of people are still educating themselves on e-discovery and the value of having e-discovery, right? Even having people trained and certified on e-discovery is sometimes a challenge. People, we hear the arguments that some people have with their their managers. So I think that's some of the problem there. How do we fix that? What can we do?
So part of the problem is also this conundrum that we're talking about at 80 to 100, because what essentially has happened, I've watched it happen. There's one very large vendor in particular that had an internship program. They still have it, I'm pretty sure. But at first they would bring in 40 people. Then the next year they brought in 32, then the next year they brought in 18, then the next year they brought in 12. Why is there such a diminishing amount of investment in interns to become project managers and analysts? And the reason is because twofold. Either one, they'd train them, they'd not be good enough, or the timeline for them becoming profitable took too long, and so it didn't work out for the business, or they were really good, but incredibly profitable because they were paid very low wages, but were able to bill at a high enough rate that the margin between their salary and their rate to the customers was actually sometimes more profitable to the business than people that had 10 years of experience that were billing their time, but had to be paid a lot more. Well, that only lasts so long until somebody else is going to come and take that talent and pay them $20,000, $30,000 more. And now they're in that 80 to 100 spot. And then it doesn't take long till that person in that 80 to 100 gets somebody who goes and grabs them and pays them the same amount, either internally or externally. And now they're at 120. So essentially, if you're good at your job in e-discovery, at least if you're represented by me, you're probably going to be making six figures within 3 to 5 years, having had zero experience, because that's the trajectory that the people we're placing are on. And they don't sit in this financial bracket for very long. That's why people aren't, in my opinion, right? That's why vendors are not investing in young, inexpensive talent, because it's very hard to retain them and retain their maximum profitability, or it's very hard to train them and ensure that they will be profitable.
Can we go back one slide? One of our attendees asked to see the previous slide. So back where we see all
the money slide.
The hiring, yeah, the dollars. So what's the salary?
And this is just law firms, by the way. We have the vendor one right after this.
Right after. So one of the things I would say also is what we're seeing, especially on the vendor side, if we want to move over to the vendor side as well, is we're getting a lot of vendors coming to us and asking us to train, right, groups for them of individuals from grad school, from law school, paralegals, and even, you know, they're looking at how do we look at individuals who are in our underserved communities and bringing them in and training them in for project management and all of that. So we're seeing a lot of that. On the corporate side, we're seeing some of that as well, but they're moving a lot of their forensic teams, right, into e-discovery and teaching them the whole e-discovery side.
Yeah, I mean, that tracks with what we're seeing too, Maribel. Corporate jobs are only 5 to 10% of the market. Most of them are pretty entry level. And if they're not, they're looking for people pretty far left in the equation. So forensic collection, internal investigations, sometimes even DFI cyber people are sort of now becoming downstream e-discovery people within corporations. But it's just not a place where your very seasoned and experienced e-discovery professional is going to find a lot of opportunity. Corporate sends the work out for the most part. There are exceptions to that rule, of course. But for the most part, the jobs are in law firms and vendors by the tune of 90%.
All right. How do vendors looking? We're at time, by the way.
We are at time, so we can quickly show everybody vendors. What we've highlighted in blue are the 5 most in-demand jobs. And what I think is compelling about this is you could see these are kind of the within the ranges for a job, the lower end of the range, right? They're not looking for senior analysts at 120 to 150. They're not looking for senior PM team leads at, 150 to 200. They're looking at that tier down, right? 2 years ago in 2022, total 180. It was the opposite, right? Because we were turning people over. Now people are slowly adding strategic augmentations, getting new matters, adding new people. They might lose people here and there. They're replacing them, but they're trying to replace them at a lower cost than the employee that departed. So a little antithetical to the macroeconomic trends of inflation and the 20% increases, 40% increase we saw in salaries in 21 and 2022. They're trying to replace them for less because they're trying to increase their profitability and margins in the vendor space. At the law firms, it's a little, that's trending a little less. We see the law firms actually paying a little bit more, as demonstrated by the ranges in both of these slides. But vendors did not raise their billables where most law firms did post-pandemic, and as a result are now trying to recapitalize on profitability by hiring less expensive talent.
Awesome. Okay.
Lots of resources for everybody that's still with us. We've got our jobs report in e-discovery and data privacy. These are my babies. So if you read my baby, I want to hear about it. Tell me about it. I'll show you pictures. I'm at Clock next week. Join us. If you're a job seeker or a hiring manager, those are all the ways to contact us. It's always a pleasure to present to everybody. I appreciate everybody joining us today.
Right. Thank you so much, Jared. We will be back next month. This is our monthly event. And if you've got feedback or questions, please feel free to reach out to any 3 of us. We're always happy to answer questions or direct you in the right, or send you in the right direction. Have a great weekend, everyone, and we'll see you soon.